Welcome inside the booth here at the Big House. I'm Joel Klatt, and this is sponsored by Dr. Pepper at every home gate and tailgate. It is the one that fans crave. Before we get started and we talk about this win for Michigan over Indiana, setting up a huge game next week against Ohio State, first have to extend our thoughts and prayers to Berkley Edwards. That was a really scary scene on that kickoff in which Berkley Edwards went down. Berkley is playing his last game in college here at home in the Big House. He was a graduate transfer from Central Michigan, started his career at Minnesota. He's Braylon Edwards' brother. His father, Stan, also played here at Michigan, so he was getting that one last chance. He comes in. He's playing at Michigan. They threw him in the ball game. He played a little bit on offense. He was in the game there on the kickoff, and kind of went horribly wrong. So really hoping that he's okay. Jenny Taft did have the report late in our telecast that he did have feeling in his extremities. So that is wonderful news as we kind of sign off into the night here for Berkley Edwards. As well as some other injured guys. Chase Winovich, we hope he's okay so that he can play next week. But most of all, just thoughts and prayers to Berkley and his family. And we hope that he makes a speedy and full recovery after that scary scene here on the field at the Big House. Now as we get into the game, Indiana played really well. Michigan offensively was maybe as good as they've been all year long until they got into the red zone. So 31-20, they get the win, but Michigan's going to lament the fact that they only scored those points that they did because they were in the red zone constantly. They only punted the ball one time tonight. And Shea Patterson was very good. They were solid on the run game. They made some plays in the passing game in the back end. Their tight ends were good. Eubanks had a nice touchdown. But they had an inability to finish off drives. They would constantly, in particular on second down, get stopped in the red zone. Their run game could not get the push that it needed to get, that it was getting in the normal course of the field there, in the normal down and distance. And Indiana did a great job, and they forced Michigan to sit there and attempt field goals. That's where I'll go next. Jake Moody comes in, and now all of a sudden he's a star for Michigan as he makes 6 field goals in this ball game. It's always double-edged sword for a head coach. So Jim Harbaugh will lament the fact that he has to settle for 6 field goals and also be happy for the fact that they've now got a kicker that is much more consistent than their previous kicker. Quinn Nordine, their normal starting kicker, started struggling against Wisconsin earlier this year. That struggle really bled into the back half of the season. In fact, he had missed 4 of his last 7 attempts coming into tonight. He struggled again in warm-ups tonight as I was watching him getting ready for Indiana. And he finally hits another knuckleball that barely crosses over the crossbar. And Jim Harbaugh says, Jake, you go in and take the next rep. Jake hits a nice kick. And then sure enough, it was Jake Moody taking the kicks as we got into the game. 6 for 6. He sets an NCAA freshman record with those 6 field goals today. So Jake Moody, kudos to you. That was an excellent performance. That offense has got to get better on second down in the red zone. Look for Shea Patterson to be more of a threat running the football next week against Ohio State, as all options will be open. They also need to get their tight ends more involved in the passing game. They had them open a couple of times, but the speed at linebacker really closed down some of those windows for Indiana. That Indiana defense was pretty good once they got into the red zone. Not great overall, giving up over 500 yards, but in the red zone, they showed off their speed, in particular at the second level, and those young players played really well. So brighter days ahead for the Indiana Hoosiers, in particular on the defensive side that Tom Allen is responsible for. On the other side of the ball, Michigan's defense was not as dominant as we have seen them in the past. In fact, they gave up over 10 completions for the first time since the Northwestern game with the pass defense. It came in as the #1 pass defense in the country. Peyton Ramsey had a decent night. He ran the football well, which is something I'm sure Urban Meyer is going to look at and want to incorporate. You might see Tate Martell a little bit more than you normally do next week for Ohio State, as Dwayne Haskins is not a great runner. And what Peyton Ramsey showed against this Michigan team is that you can run the quarterback and make some yardage and get some key conversions, in particular on third down. That defense had some injuries. Chase Winovich is a guy that we're going to need to see come back onto the field. I don't know if he will. It was a cheap shot by Stepanak. There's no doubt about it. There should have been a penalty. If I was a Michigan fan, I would be irate about that. If I was Chase, I would be irate about that. I'm hoping that this is not a serious deal for Chase, although it looked like his shoulder was kind of driven into the ground, and I'm sure we'll get an update here as we move into next week, Thanksgiving week, in preparation for the game. Overall, though, this Michigan Michigan team has done everything it's been asked really since the first quarter of the Notre Dame game. You can make a really clear argument that since the first quarter of the Notre Dame game, they have been one of the better teams in the country, certainly over this 10-game winning streak, They've won 10 ball games in a row. 8 of those have been in conference play, and now they're on the precipice of playing Ohio State for the right to go to the Big Ten Championship, which would be their first appearance in that ball game, and give them a chance to do something that no other team in college football has ever done. That would be winning 9 conference games and a conference championship game. We've never seen a team from one of these leagues that plays 9 conference games go undefeated in conference play and then win their conference championship game. So Michigan fans, that's what I'm telling you is your best hope is the argument that no team has ever gone 10-0 in conference play. And so for me, if I'm the committee, I've got to include Michigan at that point, regardless of what happens with Alabama in that SEC championship game. Another argument that I would use for Michigan is not only would they be 10-0 in conference champs, which would be the only team to ever do that in conference play, but also I would point to the first half of the Citadel game. Listen, if you're going to play the Citadel in November, the week before your rival, you've got to blow them out from get-go. You're the unanimous number 1 team in the country, speaking of Alabama. And I think you're a great team, Alabama. But guess what? I believe that performance in the the first half, today against the Citadel, disqualifies you from the playoff if you lose to Georgia. You can't argue that, well, we're just the best via the eye test when you're in a 10-10 game with the Citadel at home in November. Therefore, win and you're in. There's no doubt about it. If you lose, I would argue that absolutely Michigan would get in over you if they're able to take care of business over Ohio State and if they're able to take care of business over Northwestern. Now, would Alabama get in over, let's say, an Ohio State team that has struggled down the stretch, struggled today in a 1-point win over Maryland, obviously struggled in that large loss to Purdue? Now we can have more of an argument. But this team that Michigan has thrown out there, I got to tell you, the 10 straight wins, have a chance to be the first team to go 10-0 in conference play, including a conference championship game. I think that would ultimately carry the day in a playoff scenario. So that's my thoughts on Michigan. Around the country, there was a great game in Stillwater as West Virginia goes down to Oklahoma State. And by the way, Oklahoma State has been a thorn in the side of the top 4 teams in that conference this year. They have not had a great year, but they, again, continue to play well under Mike Gundy. They continue to develop. I'm sure that they're going to be right back into their winning ways next year, maybe the year after. But they get a win over West Virginia, and they were down 10 points with 5 minutes to go. Think about the heart and the character that Oklahoma State showed in the last couple of weeks. Not only did they take OU right to the wire and Bedlam on the road, they have a crushing defeat in which their quarterback misses a 2-point conversion that could have won them the game. They come right back the next weekend against, I would argue, the second-best team in the conference and beat them on their home field after being down 10 points with 5 minutes to go. So Mike Gundy, well done, man. Mike Gundy's maybe the most underrated coach in the country. Everybody passes over him when they talk about some of the best coaches in college football, and yet what he's done at Oklahoma State has been remarkable. So Mike Gundy, kudos to you. Great win today. Happy for Taylor Cornelius after last week when he missed that 2-point conversion. He comes back, gets a huge win at home in what I believe is his senior night. I'm not sure if they play at home next week, but it could be one of his last, if not his last game at home there for Oklahoma State. And lastly, I know I touched a little bit on the Citadel game. And again, that you can't be in a 10-10 tie and then claim the eye test if you're Alabama. So Alabama, if you take care of business, no doubt about it, you're going to be in the playoff. I think Georgia will be in the playoff if they win the SEC. I think Notre Dame took care of business against Syracuse, and now they're marching towards the playoff. Even without the 13th data point, if the Irish are undefeated, mark it in. They're going to go to the playoff, and as they should. Brian Kelly has done a heck of a job. He is going to be one of the coaches in consideration for Coach of the Year. I know from me and several other pundits out there because of the job he has done, in particular making a change at the quarterback position, putting Ian Book in at quarterback, and the way that Irish has gone through this season, including beating this Michigan team in week 1 at home. So they're obviously in there. I think Clemson is kind of a shoe-in right now because nobody in the SEC is going to beat ACC, is going to beat Clemson. But let's get down to the cupcake schedule in the SEC. You can say that it just means more in that conference, but I can say that it's just harder in other conferences because it is. All right, your conference is very good at the top. At the top end, the SEC is extraordinary with Georgia and Alabama. The middle of that conference is very similar to other conferences. And I thought today proved why it's so difficult to play conference games right before a rival, because it's human nature to look ahead and to not play your best. And it's coach speak to say that we're going to play our best no matter what, each and every game, day in and day out, blah, 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 blah. Guess what? I thought Ohio State and Michigan both proved today that it's really difficult to do that. Okay, look at West Virginia, a little bit of a look ahead. They've got Oklahoma next week. What happens? They get beat by Oklahoma State. So that's why it's important to at least test yourself. Indiana beat Maryland last week by 2. They're developing every single week and getting better and better and better. Peyton Ramsey played a really nice game tonight. The Indiana is so far more superior and difficult to beat than the Citadel, it's not even funny. And I'm looking at you as well, UMass. So Georgia and Alabama, congratulations on your bye week. Congratulations on your bye week. I think it's absurd. And it doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what any of us say on any television show or anywhere, really. It only matters what you 13 people in the playoff committee think. You 13 people in that playoff committee room are the only people on the planet that can force the SEC to change that absurd practice of scheduling these cupcakes late in November. You're the only ones. Okay, because they're not going to change, nor should they, until they are forced, until they have to. Why did the Big 12 bring back the championship game? Because those 13 people in the committee room threw Baylor and TCU out because they didn't have a 13th data point. You are the change agents in college football. So do your job and penalize those teams for playing that schedule in November. 8 conference games should not be overlooked. LSU should not be ranked ahead this week of some of those one-loss teams that have been ranked behind them. You cannot schedule those games and claim that your schedule is far superior and you should get the benefit of the doubt at all times. That's just not how it works. But it's not coming from me. It can only be you 13 people in that committee room. You're the ones that hold the cards in college football. So I would suggest you do the right thing. We'll see if you do.